Hello, friends of Herbie. I am Steve Tendon, the Managing Director of Tameflow Consulting Limited, and welcome to this episode of the Agile Uprising podcast.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I'm your host again, Jay Hersko. Joined with me, I have my constant collaborator, Mr. Ben Al Young. Ben, good morning.
Good to be here. Thanks, Jay.
We are glad to have you. And joining us once again is the man, the myth, the legend behind Tameflow. We're here to talk about Steve's newest book, Standing on Bits, Mr. Steve Tendon. Steve, thanks for taking the time.
It's my pleasure to be here, and well, thank you for that myth and legend. I hope I can live up to that.
So I guess, Steve, I'll start with this simple question, right? So we had you on once before to talk about the book of Tameflow, and you just put out Standing on Bits, which is a much more compact version of Tameflow. So what led to this book? And for those that are curious, how does this differentiate between the book of Tameflow?
The backdrop of the two books is different, though the content is in many ways overlapping, but it's presented in different ways. The first one, we could say, is for a general audience, and in particular, given the industry in which we operate, all those that maybe are familiar with Agile and all the variations thereof, Kanban, Scrum, Safe, you name it. The Standing on Bits is more deliberately aimed at people who know about the theory of constraints. In fact, no, the title Standing on Bits is trying to recall the title of a paper written by Goldman, which was Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, which in turn recalled the famous saying of Isaac Newton. So it's like a long string from Isaac Newton until this, till this little booklet. The reason for writing this Standing on Bits is that the people who are in TOC, they might be experts in handling traditional projects with their very well thought of critical chain project management approach. It works great for traditional projects, but TOC has not really cracked the nut of how to make their brilliant ideas coexist with Agile, and that's what I have done. So the idea was to give the TOC audience a way to bridge their concepts to what matters from an Agile perspective. I think that also defines what you should know before you read the book. The precondition, the prerequisite for reading Standing on Bits is that you know TOC inside out. Otherwise, it might be a bit hard, and then you're advised to read the first book first.
And Ben and I, we were sharing our notes and talking back and forth. We and I'm sure, Ben, you would agree, whenever we start talking about theory of constraints around Agile practitioners, and I'm sure you see this too, Steve, you get, oh yeah, I read the goal, pregnant pause, Herbie, pregnant pause, and then they'll say something like either flow or drum buffer rope, and then the conversation turns. Because I don't think there is the emphasis on the level of education around the theories, the information behind TOC that we see in some of the other methodologies. I mean, you'd agree, right, Ben? We've been in some of those uncomfortable conversations where people's eyes just glass over.
Yeah, you tend to get the summary and a few highlights, but that's kind of it. I think it would do us all better to understand this stuff more.
Right. I think that's a very common situation that people have been exposed to the theory of constraints, and typically it is through reading the goal and maybe various blog posts here and there, where maybe they know about the 5 focusing steps, and the general impression is, oh, it's all about chasing the bottleneck. In reality, well, we spoke about this last time, it's not the bottleneck, but the constraint, which is a more general concept. But what is really important to understand is also that TOC is really two huge bodies of knowledge. One is the constraints management proper, or the bottleneck thing, if you wish. But the other one goes under the name of the thinking processes. And that covers a lot of ground because it gives you a way to analyze, to understand reality, and to draw conclusions, and thus make decisions, which then turn into actions and things that you deliver. So it's really a way to gain, let's say, the scientific approach, but applied to the realm of management.
Perfect. So last episode, Steve, we talked a lot about the concept of bottlenecks. We talked about flow. We talked about theory of constraints and all that sort of stuff. Ben and I wanted to do something a little bit different this episode, to go into some of the other concepts that you've introduced that really, I think, have a lot of legs. The first one I think I'd like to tick off is the idea of performance flows in an organization. So you came up with the idea of there's 4 performance flows in an organization. There's psychological, informational, operational, financial. And then you had this great graphic on page 11 where how they're all inextricably linked to both financial and human performance, and how one feeds the other. Could you expound on a little bit more of that, Steve, for those listeners that may not have the book in front of them?
I have to get to page 11. I don't remember all the graphics by heart. So, this like also illustrates, if we want to take it like from a longer perspective, it illustrates that Tameflow has multiple dimensions, and it might have become known as the application of TOC to knowledge work and agile, but Tameflow, as I think we said last time, the origins are really in patterns, pattern languages, and pattern theory. And when I talk about these 4 flows, financial, operational, informational, psychological, the financial and operational are more aptly the domain where I apply the theory of constraints. But then I have the informational flow, and that is where I do a lot of thinking and work with patterns and pattern languages, pattern theory. And then psychological flow is entirely inspired by the works of the late American-Hungarian psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Is that how you pronounce that? Because I was going to ask you. I just picked that up, and I was trying to Google it, and I'm like, I'm talking to my phone, and I know I'm butchering the pronunciation. My Google is never going to find this book.
The trick is to think of Csikszentmihalyi.
Okay.
That works. So those are like the theoretical backgrounds of the 4 flows. But what I try to do is to, first of all, if you improve on any one of those 4 flows alone, you will experience great improvements. So focusing on any one alone is worthwhile. Agile, Scrum in particular, focuses almost only on operational flow. The majority of Scrum is there. But what I try to do is to create action on all 4 flows, and not only improving them, but, and this is the secret sauce, making them all align so they go in the same direction. And thus we aim at one of my battle cries, creating the unity of purpose between all the actors in the organization.
I love how when you get into this concept of flows and you have them all dashed on, aligned on top of one another, there's a quote you had, which I actually printed out on a Post-it. It's sitting here next to my desk, where Agile fails to connect the changes it produces in operational flow with the financial results expected in financial flow. And when you read that, I kind of stepped back and I did one of those. I stared off into the sky and I went, shit, he's right. Because that's, Ben, right? That's one of the things we really struggle with is, you have people running around yelling Agile, 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 to quote Mike Cadell, Agile, 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 Agile. But yet there's somebody on the other side with the bean counter, right? Who's looking at the checkbook going, how does that tie to this? And it's almost like a disconnect.
Yes, I think that is very common, and not only for Agile, but for most improvement approaches. And the insight really comes from the part of theory of constraints which goes under the name of throughput accounting, or more generally, throughput economics. Because just as we learned from the story of Herbie, um, any kid that could walk faster than Herbie, even if he started running double or three times the speed, would not influence an ounce the time it would take for Herbie to arrive at base camp.
Mhm.
In other words, the performance of the system is limited to the performance of the constraint. So what has this to do with the financial aspect? Well, when you run agile transformations, those wonderful events that last 2 or 3 years, and where everyone is called to participate and elevate their own performance or engagement, you name it, whatever they want to improve. Well, the more people that are engaged, so the larger the company, the more likely any one of those activity will give zero results. Why? Because they are not the constraint. So most of those efforts, I would say 99.999 period, are wasted. And then the beat counter say, hey, we spent like 800,000 on training and coaching, or even millions on training and coaching all these people. And then we look at the bottom line. Did it move an inch? No, we got
Mm.
a lot of costs. And most likely we also distressed all these folks because we sent them to force training. And then you get the next wave. Oh, Scrum didn't work. Let's try with Kanban. And oh, Kanban didn't work. Let's try with Safe. And so you get this fatigue of keeping on changing and changing, but you never see the results. And of course, this also creates some sort of resentment and the stereotypical resistance that many in the agile space have towards, I would say, against management, just gets reinforced because managers, they ask for the results, they don't see them. And maybe the people who've been doing Scrum and what else, they are celebrating because the throughput, if you're doing Kanban, the operational throughput increased by 2% or 200%, it doesn't matter. The bottom line didn't move an inch. So
Mhm.
it's that connection that is missing. And that's what I provide with Tameflow.
The what is it? The local optimization. Everybody's optimizing locally, but there is no consistent tie-in. So, like you said, my team is great. We're up 2% in our performance. That's great. And then you look, it's the equivalent of that old comic of the boat is sinking, and the two guys up front are, look at how fast we're rowing, and the two guys in the back are going, look at how fast we're bailing water. And it's completely incongruent to where you're actually trying to do.
Yeah, correct.
You have another quote here, Steve, which I think is kind of a bit of opening the kimono and having us look at ourselves, where we talk about engineering is responsible for the costs, yet no one is responsible for the benefit realization. And that ties to the whole, you made a remark about our agile transformations, which we sadly typically run as projects. And there's a lot of emphasis on getting the estimate right, and the estimate, and when are you going to deliver, and how long is this going to take? But it goes into production. We do a quasi postmortem. Life moves on. And who is the one actually holding Ben's feet to the fire? Because Ben requested this multi-million-dollar initiative. Who's the one holding his feet to the fire to say, are we getting the money out of it that we put into it, that we expected?
No one, because what typically happens is if the business results do not match the expectation, then there are many excuses which are much more credible than the excuses that the engineers come up with when they miss the estimates. We all know that the estimates don't work, but the excuses you have from the market perspective, it's always the market that moved on, and another competitor came up with something else. There was a new regulation. There is always an excuse, so no one is really held accountable because they can always find an excuse. But that's what I say. If you want to create a high-performing organization, just as in principle, the business expects estimates from the technical side, and I repeat, estimates don't work. We don't use them in Tameflow. Well, this is another point I want to highlight, but that's the general expectations. Well, likewise, we should expect that the business side properly estimates what this thing is worth. Now, you want us to do this. Why? What are you planning to bring home? And this is so essential that it is central to the way I do the let's say the intake process of what we should do next, and select what we should do and prioritize what we should do. So it's not just a sort of revenge of the nerd that wants the business to estimate value. It is really fundamental, because in those two estimates or forecasts, one on the technical side, which is about time, and the other one on the business side, which is about the dollar sign, so money over time, we have a situation where we can bring about collaboration between these two camps. And this is unheard of, I think, because the Agile space, as I mentioned before, is so loaded with anti-management sentiment that that there is some well, resistance to that. And likewise, managers are not used to collaborate with the techie side. So this is has far-reaching consequences, because when we talk about collaborative knowledge work, it's not only the collaboration between the tester and the coder, it's also the collaboration between the technical engineering side and all those that are on the business side, sales, marketing, strategy, you name it. So it has this very important aspect of creating collaboration. And then it is the basis for the fundamental, let's say, value diagram. The financial throughput rate, which is the metrics that I use to assess the worthwhileness of any initiative, is basically, excuse me, is basically money over time. So we need both variables.
Awesome. Ben?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about, or hoping you can share with everyone, you mentioned management by exception using aging, kind of eating into items buffers. And I thought it was really cool how you laid it out. The way I kind of interpreted it was that, you know, speaking of how this meshes with the Agile world, I feel like a lot of us have dealt with sort of the originally just prescribed Scrum, daily Scrum, where people kind of go one by one, and anybody whose turn it isn't, they just kind of, you know, stop paying attention or start playing network wars on their phone or whatever it is that they might do. And then I consider something that's, you know, a little bit better than that is something that's a bit more like a, in the Kanban format of walking the board from right to left, and you focus on getting things done, and you go by work item as opposed to by individual. But you sort of propose sort of what I consider to be sort of an even more evolved form of that, which is using management by exception because of aging of items. Could you speak a little bit as to how that works?
So the aging of items on the workboard, on the Kanban board, is actually a concept that that developed in many conversations with Dan Vacanti and his Pro Kanban. Dan probably started doing this before me, but when I saw it, I thought, well, this is exactly what I do in the aggregate. So to be clear, the aging signal is on a single work item. In the aggregate, I mean the let's say the work package, the units of delivery, which, you know, I call the move, but it could be like the sprint backlog that you commit to deliver at the end of the sprint. So it's a number of work items, a number of user stories. When I deal with a number of user stories, I have a way to use let's say the buffer management technique of critical chain project management, which is the source of the idea of work execution signals. So when I spoke with Dan, I saw the immediate connection and I thought, okay, we need to have the same kind of let's say three colored signals. Dan just works on percentiles, and when the aging goes beyond a certain percentile, that is what draws attention. I introduced the distinction that comes from critical chain project management to have like the three zones. Green, everything is fine. Yellow, oh, be careful, start looking at the situation, be prepared. And red, act, because you are not late yet, but you will be if you do not act. So how does it work on the Kanban board? Well, the basic thing is that we keep track of flow time. The more conventional term is cycle time, but there is a subtle distinction to be made. We won't do it now. Just think of the time from start to finish. And we can measure that time not only from start to finish throughout the board, but also throughout every single column or work state. And therefore, we can start to have like a flow time distribution, the statistics of how that timeline looks like. And basically, if a work item stays still for too long in one column, so it is aging, after a certain threshold, we have a signal. The first threshold is when it goes from green to yellow. That means pay attention. This is probably a challenged item. And the second signal is when it goes from yellow to red. Now, what I teach, and I start from the Kanban board, but then this behavior goes over also to the buffer signals. Well, what I teach is this behavioral response, that when you go like in you have a signal, you have a few things that you need to do. One is to keep track, so you record in a log what you think are the reasons for that thing aging. So the signal, why did it come about? And the second behavior is that when something goes in the red and you have to resolve it, we want the entire team to swarm. They go to the item that is aging. We don't do, as often is the case, that we have flowbacks, that the car that maybe is stuck there is sent back to some previous stage because something was missing. No, we keep it in place and we make the people, so to say, come down to the point where it's stuck. And if the team is, well, the assumption is that the team by swarming will resolve the problem and the thing gets unstuck. But if the team is not able to resolve the problem, the third element is that we want to escalate this as quickly as possible. As soon as you realize that it is beyond your capability of resolution, that's where you get the escalation signal. So this is the sense of a management by exception, because you call management action on the exception. It might be hard to learn, especially for management, because it requires that we reformulate the social contract, if you wish, the working agreement that there should be in place between the engineers and the managers. Managers have to understand that when that signals happen, it's serious stuff. So they need to act as quickly as possible and either resolve the situation, maybe even with, let's say, a service level agreement, so we keep them accountable again to respond within 48 hours or whatever, or if it cannot be resolved, then the issue, the work has to be cancelled and backtracked. What this creates is like a maniacal attention to getting things moving. As soon as they start to slow down beyond what is the norm from the statistical flow distribution, we act immediately. We don't leave anything to age on the board, and then you have those cases where you had that story card parked there in the corner of the board, and it was there maybe for 200 days, and everyone has forgotten about it. So we avoid that.
Our podcast host Troy, he uses the term turkeys. That's his label for things that have been on the board for past a certain amount of time. And he was consulting somewhere where they had an actual portfolio Kanban board, and he said, how do you all think things are moving through the system? Oh, it's moving great. And he bought turkey stickers, and he would go up to the card on the board and put a turkey sticker on the stuff that's been there too long. And to your point about, the maniacal focus on getting things moving through the system, it sounds kind of childish, Steve, but he said once he started putting turkey stickers on those cards, people were, to use your word, maniacally focused on getting the turkeys off the board because it didn't look good if our board had 4 turkeys and the other board had none. So yeah, it's concentrate your statement of getting the stuff moving, get the work moving through the system is amazingly insightful. Don't worry about are we being resource efficiency? Is the work getting through the system? I'm sorry, Ben, I cut you off.
Oh, no, I was just saying that I think these signals sound incredible, and using them to be well informed by sort of historically how fast things are moving, and having those different thresholds of the green, yellow, red. It really kind of focuses you to focus on what matters and kind of just let the rest go, let it flow, really. And so it seems like a much more intentional way of using calories, whether it's swarming or whether it's management intervention somehow or support. It just seems way more effective. That I think fits in kind of well with another question about averages. I'm sure you seem to be a close collaborator with Vacanti, and he talks in his books quite a bit about the flaw of averages. And when I was reading that stuff, I was thinking quite along the lines of, I almost never want to use an average again. It just seems like this thing that's quite overused or overapplied in ways that don't work out well. But you actually changed my mind a little bit to have a bit more of a nuanced view of it in terms of when you're making these buffers, an average can be a fine enough starting point. And then from there, you can kind of, I think you used the phrase, you can either tighten the bolts or loosen the bolts depending on how things go from that point forward. So could you speak a bit about how averages work in terms of informing these buffers?
Well, averages alone do not work. So on that point, I completely agree with Dan. You should not think in terms of averages. But the average that I use is an anchoring point. And we do use it as a heuristic to very quickly get the ranges that we want to use as buffers. Now, you could do this in a very scientific way, and Dan does a lot of Monte Carlo simulations, and you could use a Monte Carlo simulation to establish what are the more the more reliable thresholds with respect to where you want to place the buffer. You could do that, but then you would need to have the tooling for doing that, and most people don't. So what is the trick? It's a heuristic. So it's not precise, but the purpose is to get going as fast as possible and be pragmatic, to have something that works. If you have the average, you could say, okay, more or less it's 50%. So just by proportion, we can establish, for instance, the 60, 70, and 80%. It will be wrong because you don't have the actual distribution curve, but it's good enough to give you the signals. We don't care about doing an exact statistical modeling. We care about the signals, because the focus of Tameflow is, if I want to make a distinction with other methods, is squarely on execution. And the signals are the most important things to get stuff like unstuck, as we said before. So a quick way to establish where you can like place the buffer, the anchor point, and how you can size it is good enough. Now, in a different part of the book, I also connect this to like the psychological flow, because those buffer signals will also reflect the stress that hits the team. So the point is, statistics notwithstanding, you want to be able to load or unload the team in such way that they are just a bit challenged, but they can do it. But you don't want to overload them, because then they are stressed and then nothing moves. And likewise, you don't want them to get bored, because then attention fades and you will start to have like quality problems. They get sloppy and so on and so forth. So by looking at the signals you get from any buffer you have placed there, even with an approximate heuristic, then as time goes by as you mentioned, quoting me there, you can like tighten the bolts or let them loose. So that means you make the buffer smaller and you shift it to the left, or you make it wider and you shift it to the right. And you see this immediately in where the work items or the moves are, the buffer burn rate of any team. So I tend to say that you should strive to keep the teams in the yellow signal zone, because then you're in the flow channel as we refer to it in the psychological flow. So there are many interconnected parts here, which start off from the average, but that is just the anchoring point. That's where we start to have something to put in place, and then we tweak and tune it as we go along.
I like that. I like that, using the average as the jumping off point, right? It's the signal. And then you can, you use the term earlier in the book, shape and form. That's what you want to get to, but you can use the average to start as a jumping off point.
Yeah, I call it an anchor because that's that's the point where we fix the beginning of the buffer to start with.
Mhm.
And also these 60, 70, 80% points obtained through proportion are absolutely wrong, but they work. So better something wrong that works than something right that doesn't work.
very, very well said. Very well said. You got another question, Ben?
Yeah, I was wondering about tooling in particular, because I think all this, like the signaling, the visualization, and I mean, Jay mentioned earlier about the 4 different flows and how, I don't know if all 4 of them necessarily, but it seems like a lot of them are covered on something like the bubble fever chart. And I mean, that's not the only visualization that you talk about. I was just wondering, when it comes to bringing this stuff to life, do you have any recommended tools or a collection of tools to kind of help people get started using some of this stuff?
Well, there is one tool that tries to implement Tameflow as it's described in the books, and that's the links products from Adato, which is a small software company in the Netherlands. However, their product is more geared to theory of constraints practitioners. So it's not well known in the agile space, but it has most of the things that you would need to get started. Then, of course, Dan Vacantis, or his former, he created Actionable Agile. I think he's out of the product now, but basically it's his baby. That's an excellent tool for the aging signals on the work items. I would definitely start with something like that, and then for the buffer signals, you probably have to export things and tweak things around in an Excel sheet or something like that. There is no tool that does the whole thing. So if anyone is listening and has an itch to scratch, as we say, this is a great opportunity.
Ben, we're going into software. Yeah. Well, speaking of an itch to scratch, Steve, I like to talk a little bit. It's not specifically about the book, but you just spun up a very vibrant community through Circle. So can we talk about that for people who want to connect to you? They want to learn more about Tameflow. They want to get in the room with other practitioners. Could you give our listeners a little bit of information about that?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question, because this is my latest initiative. It is like, if you wish, a private Facebook or a private LinkedIn. And it was all triggered by the fact that well, the well-known social networks, I think, just do not work to have like deep professional conversations, respectful conversations about these topics. And also things get lost. Try to find the post you did like 2 weeks ago on LinkedIn. No, it's lost in a black hole. You can't find it. So it's very, very hard to have like cross references. So I created this circle, and the website is circle.tameflow.com, where now anyone can join. It's like sponsored by me, by Tameflow. There is an open space where anyone can join, and we have conversations about all things in the industry, from TOC to Lean to Agile, Kinefin, you name it. And then, of course, there is an inner circle where I have my courses and other goodies for those that want to enjoy them. That is behind a paywall. But the open space is open for anyone and for anything. Of course, there is some degree of moderation because I want to avoid the mudslinging that happens in other places. And as long as people are respectful and want to have a conversation about these topics, you're all more than welcome to join.
And we will provide a link in the show notes if anybody is really interested. I'm a member. I suggest everyone check it out. There are some really brilliant conversation going on, even in the open space section. There's some really good conversation. It is kind of funny how most social media devolves into mudslinging and what I term, Steve, as intellectual buffoonery. People making these statements that they think come off as like grandiose, and they're going to be like Gandhi or Osho, and it comes out and it's like, really? Like, you thought that was a good idea? Yeah, it wasn't a great idea. All right, so let me ask you this, Steve. What's next for you? What's next for Tameflow?
Well, great question. I still have my my aspirational book, the Tameflow patterns. I don't know if and when I will ever be able to finish that off. Now, it's the draft started 2016. That's one thing I want to do. I have an ongoing conversation with the legendary Tom Gill and his ideas of multi-stakeholder value quantification and management, competitive engineering. There are great synergies between his methods and the things I do. The face of the intake, which we call the full kitting. That's one area where his techniques can have great value. So that is like a research topic, a research area that I'm developing. Yes, of course, the engagement there with the circle. That's I want the community to grow and thrive, and maybe as that goes forward, one idea is also to make it into an open marketplace for people who are offering services in this space. Not only Tameflow, but any kind of school of thought. It's really open. I'm not like the safe or Kanban guys that unless you do their thing, you better shut up. No, that's not me. Anyone can come and speak.
Ben and I were just having this conversation where you get more value out of finding something that's off to the side and outside of your current specialization. If you just specialize in digging deeper into, you can only go so far into theory before you wake up and you realize you have actually created cranial rectal inversion. So Steve, we're quickly hitting up on time. So if people want to get in touch with you, they want to find more information, how do they reach out? Where do they go?
Probably the most direct channel is on Twitter. I am at Tendon, Tendon. Otherwise, join the circle. There we also have direct messaging. So circle.tameflow.com. On LinkedIn, you find me again as Tendon. So it's always Tendon. It's the broken tendon. It's always there.
Fantastic. So on behalf of Ben and myself, Steve, I want to thank you for taking the time today to sit with us. This is, once again, it's an enjoyable conversation. We have a lot. I have half-page notes here. I have a lot to ruminate on. On behalf of Steve, Ben, and myself, I want to thank all of you listeners for listening once again. Find us on Discord, continue the conversation. I think we just hit registered user number 453 or something. So it's slowly but surely growing. Get in on there. Thank you to Machine Man Records and Krebs for our royalty-free outro music. We do have a Patreon. We are committed to being free. However, if you like what you hear and you want to chip in, do so. We also have a Patreon rewards program now where once a quarter we're sending out gewgaws. We just sent out a fancy pair of Agile Uprising socks. Who knows what you'll get next month? Maybe you'll get my safe training manual. Who knows? So once again, until next time, this is the Agile Uprising podcast signing out.